All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Drew. This is Mike.
Yeah.
I'm not going to
You sure?
talk about how much. We did prepare for this quite a bit.
No, we didn't. We did not. We do what we usually do, which is kind of like go off the feel of everything, and we're just going to kind of chat about what the actual subject matter is. And, of course, if you guys have questions, please feel free to cut us off and tell us how ridiculous we sound in the interim. But we want to make sure that this talk is as not boring as possible.
Yeah.
So I'll let you introduce yourself and what you do and who you are and how long you've been in the industry.
Oh, okay. I've been in the industry as long as you have. So
Oh, yeah, that's true.
I don't know how long it is. Like
I don't
maybe
know anymore.
7, 8, 9 years, something like that.
No,
More or less?
I think it's less.
Less? Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe less. It feels like that.
Yeah, because we're getting old.
Yeah, so I've worked at Pixar, Disney, Sony, on a few different projects recently at Skydance, Netflix, and I met Mike at Art Center. I guess we'll get to that part.
Yeah, I guess.
So, yeah, and I'm an art director, production designer, artist, and yeah, that's basically me. So go ahead, Mike.
He's a little bit more than that, but he'll tell y'all later. Yeah, so my name is Mike. I've been in the industry for as long as him, and we met at Art Center. But before that, after that, I've been originally slated to do concept art and just concept art, but eventually I became an art director as well as co-founder of 9B. I've worked on or at different companies such as ILM, Marvel, Insomniac, Netflix, and a bunch of other places. Kind of jumping actually between like live action, animation, and video games, as well as like really bad commercials that I will tell you all about later. And I'm going to tell you all so many things later that I'm going to forget all the things I have to say. But with that being said, one of the things that we want to talk about was our journey getting there and how we are just receptive to pure pain at all times. And and that's kind of all we do. And we hope that y'all don't do it the way we did it. It's like if our souls were like a being, it would just be a beaten down person in the middle of the street for sure. I promise you. But we're good now. We're happy now.
We're alive.
So yeah, kind of, except for certain moments. Yeah. Anyways, so yeah, we went to Art Center. I think it was around, we met maybe 2014.
Something like that.
Yeah. See, look, we don't even have our shit figured out. But we went to Art Center around 2014, 2015, one of those two. And I met someone just as toxic as me, which is him. And essentially, it's like, you like toxicity? I do too. And basically, we went to school. It was a tough-ass school. Art Center is known for that reputation. We're generally... The teachers are known to beat you down to an inch of your life in hopes that you rise from that, which generally doesn't happen. And so somehow it worked out for us and we're still alive. But essentially what happened was I was trying my best, trying my hardest, and I saw someone who was trying harder than me, and I didn't like that very much. So I met him through a mutual friend, and we were supposed to like do like a group assignment. And also, we both recognized that we wanted to learn. We want to push ourselves to another level. And a lot of the times when you try to do that, it's funny with how few people actually want to hop on the train when it's like stationary. They all want to hop on when it's like moving. And so we recognize that within each other where we're like, you know, let's start this really crazy group called the Legion of Doom. Yep,
Oh, yeah.
That's really the name,
I forgot
Legion
about
of
that.
Doom.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's
And
how it started.
it started in a Facebook group, and essentially it was supposed to be 4 of us or 5 of us who were just like pushing each other as hard as we can by essentially coaching each other while also dropping consistent work. So we would have our assignments for school, but we'd also just kind of do stuff on our own, essentially, that are more of our identity. And eventually it was just me and him standing. And basically, we started pushing each other. We're like, all right, let's just close down the group and just do this together.
Everybody left.
Yeah, everybody left. Everybody left. And so basically, some things I learned was I was focusing more on live action. He was focusing on animation predominantly, but we're also kind of both into fine art. And Actually, we should talk about that painting that I first met you. The dark ass painting.
No, we
No?
should not.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, fine.
Man, I gotta censor you this whole
Yeah,
thing.
dude, you have to censor me, period. But yeah, so we we started working together and just trying to like build each other up. And I was learning a lot from him because his specialty is different from mine. I was predominantly like design oriented, like character, environment, things of that nature. And I'll let you talk about what you specialize in rather than selling.
Yeah. So I think that kind of gets to like the heart of the talk, I think, is this idea of like mutual coaching. When I met Mike, I left behind, I had a newborn baby, just left behind a career, doing something that was much more stable than going to school for art. And when I met Mike, I was definitely like, didn't come with experience or, talent or any of that stuff. And, but for me, I knew that at that point in my life, I wasn't going to be able to stick around and make friends or do the connections that everybody was doing, because as soon as school was over, I was headed back home. So I was rarely there after school. I was really there just from the beginning class to the end of class. And my way of trying to even out the playing field was whatever the homework was, I would try to do, double that if I could. And so when I met Mike, I saw he was also doing the same thing. And now the interesting thing is Art Center, what that school was really good at was teaching people to critique each other, which can be really painful. I think for everybody here, the only way we get better is to hear criticism about our work. And usually that goes one of two ways. It's like, oh, okay, you pointed it out, thank you so much. And it can either lead you to a deep depression of like, I'm not worthy, I can't believe I messed that up, and I just showed this to Bill Perkins or somebody who's amazing, and now I feel like I'm so even further behind, it can discourage you. Or it can be the opposite, where you show it to a fellow student, and you're like, they don't know what they're talking about, I don't want to hear that, blah, 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 and kind of just move forward with your head down. And I think what Mike and I had was we both really intensely wanted somebody to tell us what was wrong, because we both feel like we had the clock on us.
Yes.
When I met Mike during that time in his life, I feel like he, I won't say anything, but I feel like he had a lot of pressure on his shoulders at that time. We were the same age and a lot of stuff going on at home and stuff. And he just had a lot of pressure on his shoulders to make this work. And I had this baby and, my in-laws and parents and everybody kind of looking at me like I was crazy. And I felt like I had a lot to do to show them that this wasn't a mistake, me going to school and spending all this time there. And so we both valued that the other person would just be so blunt with the feedback. Blunt, but also really honest. And I think Mike was really good at not saying stuff that was confusing or about taste. He'd be able to say stuff just in a very simple way. Like one of the things we recognized right off the bat, especially with my paintings, because I was primarily trying to go for color and light and be good at that, was he would say, you're really good at doing forests and light and all this stuff, but your night paintings just don't look right, And I'm like, okay, they don't look right. And he's like, yeah, we should just go paint at night. So Mike and I made a pact, and we literally did this for months. I'd go home, put my daughter to bed, call up Mike at like 10:30 at night. We'd meet somewhere around midnight, and we'd paint till like 4 a.m. And we would just, I think that was before even, now we sound old, that was before they had the iPad to paint on.
Yeah.
So we were like underneath a street light with like gouache trying to like get the colors right.
That was crazy.
And then the next morning you'd see what it actually looked like.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, oh, this is terrible. But we would do that kind of stuff, like really call each other out. Be like, dude, your anatomy doesn't look right. And then it'd be like, all right, then there's no teacher telling us to. We're pushing each other to say, get in the gym.
Yep.
We're going to go to life drawing classes double this week. We're going to figure this stuff out. And we'd really just push each other. So it became like a mutual coaching thing where he would push me and I'd push him. And if I pushed him, I would do what I pushed him to do. I wouldn't just say, Mike, do this. I would do it with him, and so it kind of helped us. And I think it's an interesting relationship. Like, I'll be honest, I don't know if it would have worked if Mike also wanted to be a color script guy.
No, you told me that a long
Because-
time ago.
Because I'd be like, all right, Mike, just get out the way. Like, I'm trying to do this,
He would have moved fast with me for sure, or scarred me, like just.
And he would have done the same to me if I was going for, costumes or for Marvel
I
or
don't know
for
about
any
that
of that
actually.
stuff.
No, I actually don't know.
Oh, I know. So because we both kind of had two different trajectories, but we both knew that we had an eye for what the other person was trying to do, we found a safe space to mutually coach each other. And I think we grew more from that
100%.
than any class that we took or anything that we did. And that's kind of the point of the talk, is to talk about that relationship and to inspire people to find that Mike for you,
Yeah.
who can help push you and give you that honest feedback, and who you can listen to and who's willing to actually put in the work with you. It's like finding a gym buddy, somebody
Yeah.
who's going to do it with you.
And going to keep you honest. One of the big things with that as well is just when we were working together, like I said earlier, we were taking on skill sets from each other. And as you guys know, through criticism and critiques and things like that, you get enough, you start to hear them in the back of your head a little bit. So like, someone says like, man, that rim light don't look like a rim light. You're like, oh shit, I got to work on this rim light a little bit more. And like, when I would do my work, I would always push the lighting. And for concept art, it's like generally what you're used to is seeing like a character and a rim light and like a dimly lit, situation. And I would always be like, oh, this has to be warm and cool and da-da-da. And that really kind of helped push my work as far as presentation goes. And knowing that that's also kind of half the battle of concept art and as a whole is you're not just doing cool designs, is knowing how to sell them, because usually you're selling them to people such as producers and things of that nature who don't know what they're looking at. They just know what cool looks like. They just know what nice looks like. And so taking on some of his skill sets that he was showing me and teaching me, it was like, then I'm able to look at other concept art and say like, oh, the color's wrong, or you could push it, or it's muddy or whatever like that. One of the big things about mutual coaching that I think gets in the way of a lot of people is they tend to have a little bit too much pride for their work, and they don't want to actually accept that, yeah, you're keeping it to yourself for now, but when you're doing it for work, it's literally in the eyes of like the whole world. So it's like, what's better, one person telling you that's shit, or the whole world telling you that's shit? Right. So that's one of the big things that we were like kind of acknowledging. And eventually got to a point where we would take classes and we would be able to like kind of teach ourselves during the class rather than like, waiting for the teacher to tell us what to do. And the mutual coaching is kind of like a gym buddy. In fact, it's very much like that. And most people generally want to keep that to themselves. But when you are art directing someone else, you're also learning to art direct yourself as well. So it's kind of like a double work, double learn type of situation. And I know when I went into school at San Francisco first, before Art Center, I remember recognizing that I need to make or fail as fast as possible, essentially. Make as many mistakes as I can early, so then I have those voices in the back of my head, not the ones that's in my head, because I have a lot of those, but like specifically the ones that are in the back of my head, just kind of pushing me and like helping me understand that, oh, this should be this way, this should be that way, and eventually you're growing at a more rapid pace. Whereas if you're staying safe, generally you're not really growing at the pace that you should. So it's really important to allow yourself to make mistakes and feel comfortable making mistakes in front of someone so they can help you get to that point rather than keeping it to yourself, because ultimately, as I said, you work for a client, and those clients all have varying opinions, varying tastes. But if you don't allow yourself to kind of grow numb a little bit to hearing criticism, then it's going to affect you one way or another. It may not affect you now, but it's going to affect you later. And it's better to just have it as soon as you can, because we only have so much energy. We only have so much time. And I don't want to be competing with someone who is half my age with double my energy. So it's better to get that out the way. And that's basically what we did. I made that sound real sad, huh? Yeah.
Mike's tired.
I'm tired.
No, and I think, that helped us through school. And then once we got through school, then we got into the industry, and we both started in different places. And we both experienced our first big successes and our first big letdowns, and I think it helped to coach each other through that too. And it became, it kind of has evolved each stage that we've gone through things. I think right off the bat, when Mike started working, and doing games and stuff like that, or I started working, doing TV or animation, stuff like that, right off the bat, everybody in our lives would be like, oh my gosh, congratulations, Mike, you got that first job. You made it. And then Mike would call me and he'd be like, oh man, I just got my first job here. Like, I'm so excited for you, man. So what's next? And he's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, what's next? What do we do? What are we going to learn here? What are we going to do next? And he's always done the same thing with me. It's like, you get a job and it's like, that's great. What's next? Like, learn as much as you can. And we had goals and things that we're trying to learn and push each other to do every single job. And I think now it's like, so we met in 2014 and it's funny. We're out with Nicole. I don't know if Nicole's in here or not, but stand up.
Everyone, she's right there.
We were out eating the other night, and it was like, I feel like when Mike and I talk about this stuff, it's like talking about how two people met who got married or something.
We did get married. Never.
But we've been talking every single day, pretty much from that day, like to this day. Every single day, there's a phone call that happens, and we're always pushing each other, whether it's something at work that's more nowadays is much more mental than it is anything, just kind of taking a step back, actually more so is really what we've been doing and trying to really think about what we want. I mean, thus 9B, which has been huge and fairly new company and has been revolutionary and changing. And that took some stepping back and really thinking on Mike's part, and the same thing on my end, doing stuff with my own stuff, which I'm, can't talk about quite yet.
Damn it.
Yeah. It's called 10B.
Allows to make it 11B.
But, and I think, Mike has had students in the past, and I do a mentorship program, and it's a really big thing for us too, is to teach other people. And I think one of the things when we were presented with, okay, you guys want to do a talk, what do you want to talk about? It's really weird because we're not in each other's industry, really. I mean, we've crossed over.
Now,
yeah, we've crossed over a little bit lately because you've done some stuff in animation, but there's some stuff in live action. But I feel like, for this talk, we really wanted to focus on how important that is to find that mutual coach, and that anybody and everybody can have it. It's a free thing. You just have to find that person out there who's willing to give that to you in return. I feel like we could go on and on about all kinds of stuff, but I don't know what time's like, and I really want to make sure it's valuable to everybody here. I don't know.
I could start riffing, but I actually want to ask somebody for if you guys have any questions, because I'm gonna talk a lot if you let me.
Yeah, and if you don't, we'll keep going.
Yeah, and then it would be all that.
Any questions or anything?
Anybody?
Is it essential to have the mutual coaching? Is it essential to have somebody that's in a different field, or does having somebody in the similar fields, does that play a part?
No, I think both work well. I mean, either option works. A lot of it is mostly accountability. And say for example, if you have a choice to go to the gym, generally what most people do is once they're tired, they're like, I don't want to go. I'll go tomorrow, right? And there's a saying that you never regret going to the gym, right? It's the same thing with art. You don't regret putting in that extra hour if this person knows you, which is also really important. And because me and him are actually very similar in a scary way, I know when he's off and I know when he's on, right? And it's knowing when to give criticism and when to criticize his mentality rather than his skill set, and vice versa. So yeah, there's a good thing in working with someone who does something similar to you, but it's probably harder to find that person who's going to be nice, kind, honest, and want to see you grow. But where it helps is you only have so many hours in a day, so many years in life, and someone who's going the other way, they're kind of essentially throwing all this other information that they're finding on the other side. So you're kind of dividing and conquering while building up your own skill set. And one of the things that it does is, if it's a real partnership, when you see that person growing, you're happy for them, but you're also like, I better not fall too far behind, right? So it's kind of motivating in a way, because I know when I see him, whenever I see him do something, I'm like, fuck, man, I still gotta keep going. After a while, I'm kind of over it, and then he does something amazing, and I'm like, fuck. And then I go and do something, and then he does 10B, and so it's really important to have that person where you kind of, you respect but also admire, right? And you admire you admire their mindset more so than their skill, because skill kind of runs dry after a while, right? Like, it's, when you get to a professional level, it's kind of hard to like keep focusing on just that. Like, oh man, like the way you painted that was amazing. It's like there's only so many compliments you can give, but it's more so about the approach and the mindset that they tackled while doing that. So like, say for example, you see two people who, actually I'm gonna talk about this now because I got to talk about it. There was this one time we took a class, and this guy, it was a color and light class, and the teacher asked for 5. Guess what this guy does? 150. Right. And he told me he was gonna do it. And I'm crazy, but I guess I'm not that type of crazy, where he's like, yeah, you know, I think I'm gonna do 150. And I was like, no, you're not. Does 150, traditional, didn't use digital. And I was like, now I gotta do something like that, right? But it's like, I had more so than like the skill, I was like, the fact that he wanted to do that and actually went for it says a lot, because a lot of people will talk but not do. And as a friend, when someone talks and doesn't do, you're not supposed to be like, good job. You're supposed to actually make sure that they're aware that they didn't do what they said, right? Because that will also hold them accountable, and then they'll say, you know what, maybe I shouldn't talk about this thing until I know I'm going to do it, right? And it's almost like you having something to prove, which will always kind of keep you going, right? One of the biggest dangers for art or any performer in general is getting a little bit too comfortable, right? And just knowing like, oh, I got this, I'm there, whatever, and you can kind of just do whatever. One of the things I know with him is everything I say he remembers, and there's been things that I've said like a year ago where I'm like, I hope he forgot about that shit, and he didn't. So so it's really important to have that person ultimately who can always hold you accountable and keep you pushing, because at the end of the day, you're always going to want to find that comfortability. But one thing that I say when it comes like to in terms of working or the industry is, it's better to aim for a high spot while you have all this energy, and then when you fall just like, you know, you fall high, as opposed to aiming low, and then when you fall to the ground, right? So it's best to, and we definitely did that when we were like, had all this like energy to like really pursue our goals and our dreams. It was like, we're burning all that young energy, and now we're paying for it. But I would never take that back. I don't regret that at all, you know? And so in that sense, I think it's good to have someone, just having someone, period, is great. Because another thing that it teaches you is how to kind of push your ego to the side. And that's, as an artist, that's really important. With anything, there's a point where you do have confidence, and confidence is also important, but feeding into your own confidence is dangerous, right? And so having someone to kind of check you at certain moments is really helpful as well. So either way works, but for me personally, because I know that I want to dive into different parts of the industry, whether animation, blah, 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 it was good to have someone go the other side and relay the information. There's a monster over here. It's like, all right, I'm not going over there, right? It's helpful.
Yeah, and I think too, to answer your question too, is like a lot of it's like maturity too. I think for us when we were younger, you know, we talk like so long ago, I just feel so tired. But
Because it was long ago.
it feels really long ago. My daughter's turning 10 pretty soon, which is really depressing.
She couldn't even talk when I first met her.
Yeah, it's crazy. But yeah, so like when we first started out, you kind of have like I don't know if anybody here watches basketball or any sports or whatever, you know, but in basketball, you're always going to have somebody like Michael Jordan, LeBron, whoever, these lead guys that come on, and they're amazing. Everybody's like, whoa, look at all the talent, look at all this stuff that they're able to do. But there's a bit of immaturity always in the beginning of their career, and they always quickly becomes, can they win a championship? Which is a different question than, are you a good player? Can you win a championship is like, can you work on a team? Mm-hmm. And in animation, we work collaboratively, and in live action, we're collaborative. Anything we do artistically right now, none of us are individual fine artists. Maybe some of us are, I don't know. I'm just speaking for myself. and so you learn to work collaboratively with people. So I think in the beginning, we both had this like individual mindset going through Art Center of like, I want to be the best artist around, this, that, and the other. And so it helped for us to be in different disciplines. Now, at this point in our career, it's like, I don't feel that protectiveness or that fear or that anxiety that I had being around other artists in the industry. I've worked with, I think there's a couple artists here I've worked with. I saw it walked in from Netflix and other places we worked at together where I was art directing. And, I try to create relationships there that are similar like the relationship that Mike and I have, which is that we can be friends, we can collaborate, we can laugh, it can be fun, it doesn't feel like work, and then you can get through it and be done. And I think that's where we evolved from. We start off just pushing each other, and sometimes we do have to have those moments where we're like, okay, snap out of it, you need to push. But for the most part, we push ourselves hard enough that I find that we're more like calming each other down.
Now,
chill,
for sure.
dude, take a day off, so if you're in a more mature place than where I was when I started, then I say go for it. Find that friend that is in your industry we could work with.
And I think that's important too, before asking the next question, is like recognizing who you are as a person rather than recognizing who you are as just an artist. Right. And I know for myself, I usually need to be pulled back from something rather than being pushed to do something. So it's good. At first, it was great having like someone who's like crazy like myself to be like, yeah, like go. And you're like, yeah, I'm gonna go. Right. But now it's like I need someone to say, hey, chill out, chill out. Take the pencil out of my hand essentially and be like, chill out, take a day.
It's marathon thinking, we're thinking about the career. Not just about, I got to get a job, when you get a job, it's like a sprint and you're just putting everything you have into getting that, just putting your foot in the door. Yeah. And I think in the beginning, it's a good place to be because every person that I've ever seen break into the industry, who I've gotten the chance to see that transition happen from student to professional, it always happens when they go to that next level that seems ridiculous, where they're like, all of a sudden something snaps and they redid their portfolio in a week. I think you'll hear from a lot of the artists here moments like that. I think even Bobby, I remember back in the day, Bobby Chu had a story about how his computer crashed, all of his files were gone, and he had to create a whole new portfolio in a week. And sometimes, sometimes what happens, we would do that with our own portfolios. I'd look at it and I'd be like, I don't like my work. And he'd be like, oh, I think it's just these 3 pieces. I'm like, no, it's all, it's all gone. Like, I'm starting over, Anyways.
And also, I think another thing, too, just like to keep in mind and kind of helps with mutual coaching, but also individual coaching, is like, if I ask any of you to do push-ups, right, and I said set a number, we say 20, your body's going to stop around 18, right? Naturally, it just does that. And it's kind of that way with setting goals. And you'll know what someone's goal really is when you see the lack of growth, right? So if someone's real goal is, I want to be popular on social media, notice it. The minute they get popular on social media, that growth stops. And you can be talking about for 5, 6, 7 years. You're like, their work looks the same as it did back then. If someone's like, I want to be the best, they're probably never going to stop growing because how do you know you're the best, right? Yeah. So it's like important to know what goals you're setting and also recognizing who you are as a person, because sometime you might not hit the bar you want not based on lack of abilities, more so lack of mindset, and what you set your goals for. But anyways, other questions? Or did you want to say something about that?
I think the only last thing I'll say, and we'll go straight to questions, is that I think my wife didn't think Mike was real after a while because...
this is true.
Because after once we got past Art Center, I never really saw Mike for maybe once every other year or something like that.
Not even that often.
But we talked on the phone every single day. No. So the point of that is just saying, if everybody's like, oh, that means I got to go to Art Center and find somebody who's near me, and you don't. It could be anybody in the world, honestly, because he could have lived on the other side of the world, and it still could have worked.
Yeah.
So, sorry, that's all I wanted to say.
Also, I forgot to introduce. This is my friend Reggie. Hey. I've known him since I was like 10. And he's an artist too.
I wanted to say something too, because from the outside, me and Mike, Brandon's back here too, we all grew up together, and we would be battling comics and stuff growing up. And when this guy went to school, and I wasn't near him and anything like that, but I would always hear about, dang, I'm about to tear up. I'd always hear about Drew. I would always hear about this guy that, and the things that you guys would conversate about and how it was pushing you, and dang, I'm getting emotional. But it's just, I don't know, because like I finally get to like meet this guy that I always heard about and see
it's crazy.
my friend grow so much. Dang, I do not want to cry in front of you.
I love you.
But you know, and I would get kind of jealous, like, who is this guy? Like, I thought we were like, but it's just.
We are.
Yeah, I know. But it's again, just this, you guys working together, being different individuals, but coming together and really being truthful.
Yeah.
You know, and seeing, you know, you seeing the work before you guys, and just seeing how this friendship continues to grow, and it's a lifelong friendship. So it's just a beautiful thing. I'm just pushing buttons up here, but man, this is. Thank you guys for letting me do this, but yes,
of course.
And I'm learning so much. So I just wanted to say that this is all real. This is all, you know, and you guys keep going.
I love Reggie. But yeah, like a big part of like just friendship in general is being able to like kick the ego out of the way.
That's the big
and you know, it's almost like let me make sure that when you're walking out, the toilet paper is not on your shoe because I don't want no one else to make fun of you. If I'm gonna make fun of you, I'm gonna do it. But I don't want anyone else to. I don't want anyone else to do that, right? And so that's essentially what we do is making sure that we're taking care of each other.
That's a really, really big one, you know, and that's one that you can't really fake. It's like you have to. That's why finding that right person, you know, in whatever space you're at, maturity level. I always say maturity level, but I think I'm just talking about myself, really, because I came at it. I'm a middle child, so I'm like really competitive.
You middle children.
But I think, you know, when Mike would get jobs the first time, I was like, I feel like I got a job, you know, like I genuinely am happy, and vice versa, and that made it work even better. But anyways, I know people were raising their hands, so if anybody has questions.
Sup?
And Stella.
For mindset, who are some of the role models or heroes or idols that y'all look to for increasing like expanding and evolving your mindset?
Oh, that's great. I know for myself, I look outside of art a lot. And the reason why I do that is because art is subjective, you know? But there's certain things that are concrete, right? So if you look at like a boxer, right? For me, it was that. It was looking at boxers and saying, I know what that is. I know what greatness looks like in that realm because this guy hasn't lost, right? Or he adjusts to every fighter, every style, right? And so that was another thing is like finding a comparison, something that I'm really familiar with and saying, okay, now how can I kind of translate that into art? So one of the big things that I always feel is when it comes to intelligence and when it comes to skill set, being able to adjust is probably like here. Everything else is whatever, because that's what true intelligence is. That's what we are. We have to adjust to any and every situation at all times. And when you see someone adjusting, that's almost like a Swiss Army knife. They're just able to like adapt to every situation and come out on top, right? So you can look at a boxer or a artist or whatever. They're amazing at a thing, but then you say, okay, we need to switch the style, and they can't adjust, right? And that's when you'll see them kind of fall. I personally admire people who I'm like, damn, this guy has like 5 styles. Like I look at like Kendrick Lamar, and I'm like, this dude can rap about some gangster stuff. He can rap about some deep stuff. He can rap about like some like, you know, love stuff, whatever. And just recognizing those tunes of greatness and saying like, I want to be like that, right? I want to be able to adjust. If someone throws like a curveball at me, I don't want to be surprised and kind of lose my bearings essentially, and most of all lose my mind, right? Because pressure is the killer of everything usually. But if you know how to handle that pressure, then you're fine. So Michael Jordan, of course, Floyd Mayweather, of course. Manny Pacquiao, of course. Musicians like Kendrick Lamar, of course. I look at stuff like that primarily, though. I don't really look at artists too much, unless it's like him in that sense, because I don't know artists like that. Because it's hard to really recognize, like, is this really good, or do I think it's just good, right? Like, I had a friend, we were talking about it the other day, where he is primarily a environment artist, and I do a little bit of everything, but I'm primarily a character designer. When I see a character design, there's a certain standard, and when he sees an environment, there's a certain standard. And I was able to recognize, I was like, yo, I think this person is good, but I'm curious what you think. And he was like, oh, to be honest, they're not that good. And he told me why. And I was like, right? Like, I get you. And it's that kind of thing, just being able to adjust and understand also things that I don't know. And so, yeah, that's generally why I think the ability to adjust is also mastering. It's not just mastering your skills and what you have, it's mastering what you lack, most of all, right? So I know there's certain things I'm not good at. I ain't gonna tell y'all, but there's certain things I ain't good at, and I master everything around that thing to get the job done. And so it's not necessarily what you're good at. It's really how well are you able to master your flaws, most of all. So I look at people like that, essentially.
Yeah, I think, I'll try to keep mine as short as possible. I have so many answers around my head right now. I know we have other questions, but I'll say a couple things. So 2 books that really were big. One of them we both went through that was really great was the Book of 5 Rings.
Yeah.
The great quote from that book, this was about this guy who was an amazing Japanese warrior. He was also an amazing painter. He was also an amazing writer. And he has this great quote that says, to know one thing is to know 1,000 things. And so it's finding those connections and creativity between writing or comedy or painting or music or all these things. Like, I started in music, I went into art, I'm now doing writing. All these things help to kind of find the connections between them all. The other one is The Art Spirit by Robert Henry. The only book I know of that was written by a painter that's like really insightful. I think a lot of painters struggle with writing it, and myself included, writing what this stuff means to us. And he's got some amazing quotes about how to develop a healthy mental mindset as an artist. The last couple things I'll say are 2 quick stories. One of them has to deal with one thing, you talk about people who would inspire you. Sometimes it's not necessarily somebody who invests a ton of time into you. Sometimes it can be like one moment that all of a sudden you'll never forget that moment. For me, there was a professor at Art Center, David Luce. And it's funny, David, I'd never really talked to David that much. I knew that he loved Beyonce. I thought that was funny. And
This dude was cool.
But there was this one time I painted this thing. It was like a fine art class, portraits. I painted it. It was kind of dark subject matter, and I felt kind of gross because I'm just not that. It's just not my thing to paint really dark, violent kind of stuff. And so I painted it, and we showed it on that day, and everybody critiqued it and whatever. And so they brought in this model, and the model had came in and had piercings and shaved head and no eyebrows and crazy makeup and all this stuff. And I was just like, I don't want to paint today. I'm just in a weird mood, So David noticed it, and he came up to me, and now you're going to make me cry because you started crying. So. This is the story that always makes me
Y'all
cry,
not getting
by
no
the
tears
way.
out of me, I'm telling you.
It just changed my life when he said it this way, which he came up to me and he was like, I gotta do my David voice now. And he's all like, you don't feel good, do you? And I was like, nah, I don't feel good. I don't feel good at all. And he's like, yeah, I remember that. There's been times where I've painted stuff I just felt like, I can't believe I made that and put it out into the world, I was like, yeah, that's how I feel, And so he said, take a look at the model and just take a look at her, let me know what you think. So I take a look at her, and I'm like, yeah, I'm just not feeling like painting right now, which he knew was sort of unlike me. So he said, I want you to look around the class and see what everybody's painting. So I looked around the class, and everybody had these really intense, gritty, dark paintings of this woman, and they were like really like, you know, black ink everywhere and like blood splat looking stuff, and just really like intense, like sort of. And I love Jenny Saville, by the way, but the very Jenny Saville feeling paintings, you know, although I love her work.
Grotesque is what he means.
Grotesque. There we go. Yeah. And so he said, okay, you see everybody's, yeah, it kind of all looks a little similar. He said, yeah, it does. That's kind of the bit of the art center thing that happens in this class. He said, now I want you to look at her again, but I want you to really look at her and look for the beauty. Sorry, he gets choked up talking about this. So I did. And, you know, I realized I had a bias, you know, and I had a judgment right off the bat, looking at this person, where I was like, you know, you look beyond all that stuff. You look beyond the piercings and all the facade and all the stuff that you kind of draw judgment right away of, oh, this is a punk rocker, whatever sort of person, and you paint like that. And I started to really think about her and just who she is, and think about her it just differently than I had ever thought as an artist in that way about somebody. And so he comes up alongside me in this creepy David way, and he's like, so what'd you see? And it's like, she's beautiful, she's amazing. And he just looked at me and he said, that's what's hard to paint. And he said, you know, everybody can paint the world around them. They can paint their opinions of what things look like. They can paint a gritty street. They can paint, people in wearing whatever clothes and however they feel about them. But the hard thing to do is to find the beauty in the world around you, despite any of those things, and to bring that out of your painting and to focus really on that. And so that completely changed my perspective in how I look at things when I paint. And every time I do a color key or anything that I do, I'm always looking for the beauty and being very sensitive to get past my biases on things and to try to really look for that. I feel like I had another story, man. I said I had two.
You said you had two, but that was
one. Okay. This is
but it was a powerful one.
That one was a long one. All right, this one is a little bit shorter. This one I heard, I had a 2-hour trip to school and a 2-hour trip back from school. I lived in Mission Viejo and I went to Pasadena. And so I listened to a lot of podcasts, and I listened to this one by the guy who wrote Arrested Development, if you guys have ever seen that show, which is hilarious. And the show, if you haven't seen it, it's just very, very funny, weird, fast-paced, dramatic show. So they interviewed this guy and they asked him the simple question, where do you think style comes from? And he said, well, I'll tell you a little bit about my career. He went to school for dramatic writing. His big dream was to write soap operas. He wanted to do General Hospital or something like that. Couldn't get a job doing it at the time. And so the only job he can get was through a friend of his who hooked him up on The Golden Girls, if you guys have seen that, which is like a sitcom.
That was great.
3 generations of women. And so he was like, okay, I'm not funny, but I'll try. So he went there and it was terrible. And his writing was terrible and nobody thought it was funny. And at the end of the week, he knew for sure he was going to get fired, you know. So he was kind of upset, bitter, down on his luck Thursday night. And he said, you know what, I'm just going to write my version of The Golden Girls. And I'm just going to make this so dramatic. It'll be the most dramatic episode of Golden Girls you've ever seen. And so he just wrote it and was just enjoying doing what came naturally to him. And it came in the next day and this was really supposed to be an FU to like everybody at his way out. Like, I do have talent, you know, it may not be comedy, but I'm good at something. And so he comes in the writer's room and everybody's just dying laughing. And he's like, what? And everyone's like, this is brilliant. They're like, and he's like, but it's dramatic. And they're like, but it's so dramatic, it's absolutely hilarious. And so his quote at the end of that was, he thinks style is how you compensate for your weaknesses. So if you're not funny, but you're really dramatic, maybe you can be so dramatic that you can be funny. And I think that's similar in painting. You may be bad at perspective, but maybe you can find another way of doing something like with cubism or something like that to imbue the idea of perspective with shapes instead of having to directly do perspective, you know? And so, yeah, that was another one. Sorry.
And
that was a big question, Estella. We go on.
That's a good one.
That's actually a good talk. We should just let her decide our talk next time.
Right. But yeah, that just really goes into essentially leaning into who you are and also discovering who you are and being honest, which is probably the hardest part. Being honest about who you are to yourself, that's tough. And I think like most of us kind of like skate on top and we're like, I'm a nice person. You realize you're not a nice person. right? Just like really diving deep into that. And when you dive deep into yourself, you are able to dive deep into your work or your craft or whatever. So kind of like what he said, it's really important to just acknowledge who you are. And yeah, you work on those things, but you don't have to always do it the way everyone else is telling you to. And kind of second to what he said, it's actually, you just reminded me because I should be doing this right now. Every time, any job I've ever had where I've been told to do something and I follow the instructions, he knows this. Anytime I've done what I've been told, I've always been let down. Naturally, I kind of like to go against the grain, and whenever I do, it somehow always succeeds. So actually, I'm working on a job right now where I need to take my own advice. But he just reminded me of that. But essentially, it's knowing who you are and leaning into that thing, right? You don't have to. Art is one of those things where you don't have to be afraid of who you are, right? In social circumstances, we tend to be because society tells us to be, but your art is the time you actually get to express yourself with true honesty. And it's something that, regardless, even if you are hiding it, you can't really hide it. You can't. You think you are, but you're not. I even had a friend, and I won't get into the nitty gritty of this story, but me and him were working in the same office, and I was just like looking at another friend's work, and I just asked him, I was like, hey, what do you think of this? He told, just looking at one image, a sketch, he's like, this person's having trouble with this, that, and that. Like, in life, not art, life. And I know this person. And I'm like, how the fuck do you know? Right? So then I was like, all right, what do you think of this? And there's another person's art. He's like, this person's clearly going through this, that. And I'm like, God damn. Like, yes and yes. But it was one of those things where someone who doesn't even know you can see it. And when you're faking it, people can see that too. Right? So it's really important to understand who you are, lean into it, and own it. It's fine. And there's a part of just being genuine, whether you're an asshole or not, where people just kind of appreciate it, right? That's when you hear the excuse, that's just who they are, right? Because they know you're being you. They're just like, I'm accepting that you're an asshole. But just be that person. Don't fake it. Because regardless of what you do, people are going to find out or they're going to feel it. And they don't necessarily always know how to describe it. It always makes them feel some type of way. And your art is the same way. When you want to be this person and you notice it's not jiving with people, generally it's because you're not really diving deep into who you really are and like just being free with it. So
That's the worst part.
it is. It really is.
Art is really like whoever's the most vulnerable wins. You know, when you
Yeah.
go to an art gallery, like
It is.
because we always after a certain point, you know, you're like, oh, you got to push that, get better at cloth, get better at muscles, get better at all these things. But it's like, well, you go into a gallery and there's still Picasso sitting next to Sargent. And so they were just two people who were so incredibly vulnerable and honest about who they were that they both won the prize, the goal of like, congratulations, you've gotten what's in here on here.
Yeah.
And the hardest thing about that is it's like therapy. Like you have to be honest about the good, the bad, the ugly. Even the story I just shared, I feel gross talking about it because I'm like, oh, Drew judged some girl for having piercing? What an asshole. You know, and it's like, no, it's not that. It's that there was an artistic interpretation, you know, and a feeling you have deep down inside you don't even recognize about yourself. And then it's like, I got to work through that.
Yeah.
And the more and more you work through that stuff and you become somebody who's very clear about your heart and where you're coming from, about who you are, your soul as a human being, the closer you get to that, the closer you're going to get to some work that will touch people in that same place.
Yep.
And that's the goal. Like I look at Tyrus Wong's artwork, my favorite artist, and I look at the stuff he did on Bambi and I'm like, God, that guy just like makes me want to cry. I just look at it and I'm like, it's just so beautiful, you know, and you hear his story and what he went through and how he got to this country and the things he went through as a kid. And you're like, yeah, I see it all. You didn't even have to tell me that. I get the sense of that soul just looking at the artwork, you know? Anyways, any other questions?
Yes.
So, my question is, I guess, about putting eggs in how many baskets? Because, for example, you do color work, you do character design and costume design, and like, how much did you figure out you should do other stuff both in your work and in your portfolio? So,
Yeah, so that's actually a really good question. For myself, I remember in the beginning I was trying to learn everything. And the reason why, though, is because I had other things that I've done prior to art where I recognized that learning a little bit of everything and knowing how to translate it into one thing actually still helps me. So I was doing a lot of character design, but then I was also doing environment. I started off doing environments, actually, and I would just do character design in my sketchbook. Like, I was like, oh, this is fun. But I eventually recognized that all of the information is the same, and there needs to be a point where when someone says to you, yo, that's it, and if you feel like this is it, that's the road I took. So, for example, I had a guy, John Park. I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry. John Park made me tear up, right? But he made me tear up because he was able to point out I was doing all these different things. And they were all at a pretty solid level, I guess. But he was like, yeah, your environments are cool, but your characters are special. And he's like, where'd you learn that? And I was like, my mom is into fashion, and I look at my mom dress up. I like to dress up, and then that's it. And he was like, you should go with that. And he's like, if no one's taught you to do that, that's what you should do. Because this other thing I was being taught to do. And he's like, yeah, you can get work in there, but you'll just kind of fall in line with everyone else. But this thing that you're doing on your own, which is, once again, me falling into my own identity, right? That's what was going to take me places. And so I was diving deep and learning all these other things, but I made sure that all that knowledge I took, I applied it to then character design. So back when I was starting out doing character for specifically live action, people, like I said, were doing the same lighting scenes, same poses, all that stuff. And I remember being like, it'd be cool if they did this, or it'd be cool if they added a background to their work, right? And I started doing that stuff, and it helped me stand out. And by the time the other people in character design would have learned it, I would have already been onto something else, right? So it's like, no skill you learn is a waste of time. I don't think so. All of it is useful if you know how to use it, right? So sometimes you might be hitting a wall with character design where you're like, my characters aren't getting better. Oftentimes, it's just like a muscle. You need to work out the other muscles to build that one muscle up, right? So if I'm hitting a wall with my character design, I need to try and dive into something else for a little bit just to learn it and understand it. So then when I come back to character, it helps. I jumped into like photography for a while, I think for like 2 years. And I remember like not doing characters like at a live action level for a while. I was just doing like cute little cartoon characters essentially. And when I jumped back, my understanding of lighting and perspective and, edges and things of that nature, all the technical stuff that takes forever to learn, I like just knew it because I was like, oh, cameras operate like this and da-da-da. It all made sense. Oh, the shadow's here, or the shadow, there's no detail, but the light is this, or the light is blown out, so the shadow's it. Like all these things I was learning from just another skill set that I was practicing, right? So it's like, it's helpful to do what you enjoy. So if you say, for example, you're doing character design and you want to do like environments, if you want to do environments, do it, but also know what you're doing it for, right? And a thing I want to actually speak to is I see a lot of people who do like online, they're like, doing a practice, right? And they like do like a whole piece, whereas like, this is a full-on piece, it's not practice, right? But how is that helpful? Most of the time when I'm practicing, I'm doing like a hand, right? Or like an eye, something where I'm like, I know that I'm going to be able to apply that. Imagine someone throwing you a whole book, a teacher throwing you a whole book and reading that whole book to you and saying, I hope you're ready to take this test tomorrow, as opposed to them giving you like 2 or 3 questions or whatever answers, and then they're like, I hope you're ready for this test tomorrow. Which one do you think you're gonna digest better, right? So I think taking things in bits is really important, and allowing yourself to recognize what do you do when no one tells you what to do is probably the most important aspect of the game, because then sometime when we get confused with all the monkey chatter essentially and everyone's like, do this, you must do that, you must do that, you don't want to do that. And based on that, it kind of will hinder your growth more than support your growth if you're doing stuff that you really don't that you don't want to do. It's important to eat your vegetables, which we talk about a lot, but making sure that you know when to allow yourself to take flight, I think is even more important, you know, because you can work. It's kind of like doing too much, like doing a little bit of everything. You're not allowing yourself to truly invest the time into whatever craft or whatever part of the craft you really want to, and that can take back too. But it's knowing when to stop and start. Essentially, is when you get the itch to draw that character, then do it, right? But if you're hitting a wall, recognize that you might need to do something else to then come back to that character and then allow yourself to build.
Yeah, and I think what you're hitting on too, even with the question, the way you brought it up, it's like that is one of the hardest things ever, is to figure out your portfolio and what you should show, because it's, to get back into basketball briefly, it's like you got to go to the gym, but you also have to learn how to play basketball, and you also have to study the other team. You have to do all these other things. And for instance, like I'll take on a student who wants to do a color script. Well, here's all the things you got to have. You got to have to do a color script. You have to have a story, storyboards, character designs, environments, research, some idea of style, beats, all these things. And so as soon as somebody gets in the industry, it is no longer fair, because once you're in the industry, you have a whole team of people that are making you look good. You know, you have the best storyboard artists at that studio that are feeding you boards to work off of, that have been designed from the best character designers that design the characters, from the best art direction from the art directors who did it, and given to you in a great timeline. You have your great people in production who are helping you and are making sure you have the time and the support and the research and all the things you need. Like, you are catered in so many ways to be helped and supported to make that piece. And when it's just you by yourself, it's like, oh my God, it's daunting. And especially if you're not a character designer, you're not a storyboard guy, you're not any of these things. I totally get that, and it makes it really, really difficult. And then also the portfolio, it's like, you want to show all the different things you can do, and then you're going to hear things from some people who say, you got to be a generalist. Other people say, you got to be a specialist. All that stuff's really hard. And I guess I would break it down this way to you guys, now that I've stressed everybody here out. Because I totally get it, and I commiserate, and I still feel that way of like, oh, it's so daunting. Even working on my own stuff, like, it's hard. But the two ways I would break it down is, it's really helpful to talk to studios and to hear what they have to say, because they're going to be talking specifically about what that studio needs. Mm-hmm. So when they say, work on this, work on this, work on this, I'm really, really like this jungle piece. Well, that might be a clue. There might be a jungle project happening that you haven't heard about because nobody's heard about it yet. And maybe you need to follow that lead and do that if you just want to get a job and get your foot in the door. And there's those moments. I've had those moments. Everybody's had those moments where it's like, I just want to get my foot in the door. So if I have to design a bunch of cabinets because it's a story about a guy who has a bunch of cabinets in his house, then great. I'm going to become a cabinet person for the next 3 months. Like, great, do that. That's one piece of advice. And so I'm going to contradict myself now.
I know it's coming.
And give my second piece of advice. This is usually what I more so like to teach on, because it's more fun, is you also want to get your heart out there. And I am a genuine believer that if you touch somebody emotionally, you're going to create a connection. Even if it's not right for that project, it might be because you had a bunch of pirates and they're doing a space project. You know, it could be something as simple as that, so don't beat yourself up. But if you connected with that person, then when they talk to their buddy over at Sony or whatever, and they're working on something that's relative to what you're doing, they're going to say, you know what, this person really stood out to me. Yep. And there's something they did that seemed beautiful. And so I always inspire people to do something that is your own story. Every time I meet somebody I just worked with somebody recently who was from India, and you know, he's like, I'm doing the story, it's about New York City, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, do it about India. Like, yeah. Dude, people would pay so much money to hire you as a consultant to talk about you and your culture and where you come from. Like, use that and share with people who you are and your family and what you come from. Like, that is such a strength. It's like, well, I don't see that anywhere. I'm like, all the more reason to put it in your portfolio to make you stand out, because maybe we don't have a great project that represents India well. You could be that person, you know? You're going to touch people, and people are going to be like, wow, I feel like I can be there. And it's because you help transport them there through your own experience. The first assignment I always do with my mentees, anybody here who's done it with me knows, I always start people off with think of the most emotional moment in your life, there has to be a first, right? So your first time you got lost at the mall, then you didn't know where your mom was, right? The first kiss you had, the first time you lost somebody who you loved, the first time you fell in love, the first time you had to leave your house and stay somewhere else by yourself, first time you had to pay bills, first time you stressed about money, all these different things. Think of the first, and whatever first it is, make sure it's one that when you think about it, it's like, oof, tugs on, like you relive it. It's like there's still something there that isn't quite resolved. And what I have is I have the students then paint it in any way they want. And I usually recommend to not do it illustratively, to do it abstractly if you can. And it's amazing. First couple weeks, people just like, they go wherever they started their portfolio, it doesn't matter. All of a sudden, I see people communicating emotions right from the beginning. First couple weeks, emotions are coming out. And you build from there. It's like, okay, here's something you feel. Let's build a project, because guess what? You feel this intensely. You're going to want to keep working on this because now it means something to you. Like for me, it was losing my grandfather, who I love. I think about him every single day. My, a big part of what I do in my own personal project that I'm working on for years and years and years. It's all about him. I love him. There's a tattoo of him on my arm. He's the guy I lived with when I couldn't live with my parents. He's my hero. And I lost him, when at an important age, where you really need that father figure. And, so for me, it's like, that's just a big one for me is loss. Like I always, anytime I'm on a project where there's a moment of loss or doubt or insecurity, I'm like, I want to do that scene,
Yeah.
because that's where I can get this stuff in me out of me.
Yeah.
So that's my two pieces of advice. It's like, there's a practical side and there's a side that makes you you, and you kind of have to do your best to balance out both of those things.
And no one will be able to do you better than you do you, right? And so one of those things also when it comes to your portfolio specifically is, you can do a million things, but think about what is that thing that you don't mind doing for a long period of time? Because sometimes these shifts can be like 8 hours, but they can also be 12 hours a day, right? 5 days a week. That's a lot. So if you're doing something that you don't want to do, it's going to really affect you in the most painful way possible. Yeah, so you just want to make sure that's how I ended up doing my portfolio over time was, I remember I had two friends who were really honest with me. Past Drew were just really raw. And I was like, hey, you guys think? And they both, without knowing each other, said take out the exact same pieces. And then they're like, it's just not you. And I'm like, oh, damn. Well, fuck, y'all know me. But it's real, though. It's just making sure that, the thing that you really want to do, keep that in there. And it's also going to encourage your growth rather than just doing something just to do it. Getting in there is cool, but sometimes it's more about how you got in rather than just simply getting in, So, yeah.
Man, I know we're over, but I don't know if we can stick around. I'm down to stick around if people have more questions. Sure.
Earlier you said that pressure is the killer of everything. How do y'all handle that specific kind of pressure when it comes up to giving you lots?
Mine's is dark, so I'll...
Wow. Yeah, I think, there's different ways of going through pressure. You can sort of wait for it. You can wait for the storm to be over. You can push through it. You could try to find a way around it. I think the best way to deal with it is to push through it. And I think that's actually specifically why having a mutual coach helps. Because every time there's something that I knew I should confront, but I'm too upset or bitter or heartbroken or whatever, Mike will just be like, go, 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 go.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't want to, but I'm always happy that I did when I get to the other end. But I think that's specifically why it helps, because I'm not mentally strong enough just to push myself through it sometimes. So it helps to have somebody else who can do that.
Yeah. So Reggie knows me, along with him, Reggie knows me probably better than almost anybody. And he knows that I personally allow myself to use every emotion possible. And Stella knows this too. So when I'm happy, if it's a great fuel for me, I will use my happiness. if something pisses me off, I'm not going to just stay mad for the sake of being mad. I'm going to use that to do something. All emotions are, to me, that's what they are. They're just tools to commit to an action, right? So if I'm feeling pressure and it's getting to me, I generally will use that pressure to like almost activate a chip on my shoulder, essentially. I'm really bad. That's why I say it's like toxic even, where I will allow myself to like go into a place where I just need to get it done. And as he said, I don't regret ever doing that, right? It gets the job done, essentially. So, yeah, that was the nicest way I could say what I was going to say.
Yeah, do we have any other questions? Or it's totally fine if people have to go. I don't want people to feel awkward.
Yeah, I don't want to ask if they have questions or
Mike
concerns.
will be upset. He'll see he's leaving, and you'll keep tabs.
Yeah, I'll be like, all right. Okay. What's your name?
Oh, sorry.
Just something, and y'all kind of answered this question throughout, but I wondered if you could just talk to it directly. Is one of the things I hear in all of this is trust, right? And trust in two ways. Both
Yeah.
that you're recognizing this is a person I can trust that's not out to get me, that's
Right.
genuinely interested in my best interest, that loves me at some level. But then also, this is a person whose taste, whose eye, whose critical sensibilities I can trust. And I'm wondering if you could talk about how you saw that in each other and how we might recognize that in somebody else in our own lives.
That's a really good question. I'll talk about the taste part because I think that's really important, and I think people tend to not really talk about that. Taste. So there's people who have opinions, right? And say someone, we talked about this earlier, someone says, I love anime. Okay, cool. But then if I show them a fine art painting, will they just totally be like, no, that's bullshit? To me, that person doesn't have taste, because you should be able to see the beauty in everything, regardless of if it's your cup of tea or if you do that thing or not. And so for Drew, he was so open to things that may not have been in his wheelhouse that already let me know that he has an eye, he has taste, right? Because a lot of times one of the most important parts with our skill set is that your eye and your skill are constantly competing, right? You'll see things and you're like, I see this thing and I want to be this good. This is amazing. And then your natural, your natural reaction to that is to build your skill to what your eye thought was amazing. And then the minute it gets there, you're like, I don't really like that anymore. And then you just keep on doing this. That's why they say tormented artists. We're always tormented because the time you finally get to the end of the road, you find out that's like just the beginning and it just keeps on going. I'm sorry, I'm getting so dark. I'm trying to hold it back, but it's like 5 o'clock. No, like,
That's kind of early. What do you mean?
I'm
That's when you
dark
start
all the
changing.
time. This is where me and Drew differ. This is also good. It's balance. But no, like honestly, like I think that's really important to me is like recognizing someone has taste and being open, because sometimes you'll want to step outside of your own wheelhouse and then you show them something and they'll just say something like, that's not what you were doing before. And it's like, well, do you recognize the growth in how I'm trying to move, right? If you look at any musician, which me and him both have music backgrounds, not like at the level of him, but it's a thing, is being able to take something and understand it. You look at a musician and say, I'm not going to use this name. You look at Jay-Z, right? And you say, Jay-Z started off one way, but then eventually you drop 2 albums, he has to evolve. He can't do the same things that he was doing the whole time because people get burnt out on it and no longer sells. It's the same thing for us as artists too, for visual artists. And so recognizing that there is a need to kind of change or pivot to continue growing, right? You've maxed out at that level. You have to like eventually pivot. So that was one of the things I noticed, that he had a wide range of things that he enjoyed. Yeah, he does animation primarily, but he would also like send me fine artists. He would also look at a few concept artists and be like, oh, this is cool. I like how they did this. And also the reason. It wasn't just, this is cool, this ain't. It's like, this is cool because of this, right? And if they can speak to why they enjoy something, which is like, for one of my first assignments for anyone, I always say, send me your parents and tell me why, right? Because you can't just say, this is cool. It's like, that means you're not really exercising your mind nor your eye to understand why you enjoy something. You're being a fan, not a craftsman, right? Which is two different things. You can be a fan of something, but as someone who partakes in a certain craft, you have to understand and be able to break down why something is effective. And so he would do that all the time.
And I think like we had appreciation and a love for art that wasn't his style nor my style, which was like the Golden Age illustrators was a big one for us. You know, any 17th century, you know, impressionists. The list goes on and on of different artists and stuff we've inspired by. And after a certain point, we started to make up a rule where it was like we only could be fan of dead guys. It was our rule. If they were dead, then we could use them to push each other, you know. So for me, he would always bring up Sorolla, who, if you know me, I love Sorolla. And when it came to color, he wouldn't be like, take a look at who, you know, what, and I'm not going to name any names either, but like, look at this modern artist who does color scripts. Like, look at his work. He would be like, look at Sorolla, you know, look at how he does this. And I would do the same thing for him, where if it came to anatomy, I wouldn't say, you know, oh, look at this current, you know, comic book guy. I would push him into being like, look at Degas sculptures, you know, or look at some sort of a master or somebody who was so amazing at their craft that we could sort of inspire and push each other in that direction. And in a way that kind of helped, because some of those things, it's like almost outside of taste. It's like, if you don't like Degas, I don't know why. I'm just confused, you know.
Yeah.
I respect you though, but you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard. It is hard to find that person for sure.
Yeah.
We're very blessed for sure.
Yeah.
I'm very blessed for sure. Like, it's
I'm
literally
blessed
my hope
too.
for everybody here to find somebody like Mike in your life, because
And a Drew.
it's a huge one.
And a Reggie. And a Nicole. And a Brandon. Brandon's here? Where Brandon at? Brandon! Be like Brandon. And Christina. Still but yeah.
So it sounds like both of you really put a lot of thought into not only your craft, but your life in general, and the way you think about being a whole person in your art. And so it goes, my question is about that. It's about how we all want to be more than just artists in the world, obviously. We want to be with family, we want to have this career that is so intense. But when we think about the sort of long road in this career, and how fast it is, and how always changing it is, and how you often have to be sharpening every skill set, it can feel like so daunting, and at times can almost need a break, like you said, kind of get a new set of a new way of looking at it, so you can come back fresh. So my question to you is, like, how are you making it so that you're adjusting your lifestyle and who you are to make it sustainable in the long run, and make it so that you can actually stay in the career to burn out?
Yeah.
Burnout
Yeah.
is a huge thing.
It's huge.
How do you do that?
It's hard.
And how do you manage?
It's really hard, and I'll be brutally honest, which, you know,
Oh shit.
this is
See,
not.
this is.
so-
I was gonna give a light
So,
answer. He's giving
I'll,
a dark.
I'll
one.
say this is not my advice, but I do know that in the beginning for both of us, I was looking at my life being like, I have a newborn baby, super important. I want to be there for her. I have my art career, which was kind of a big part of it was for her, to set an example for her, because a lot of people in my family talked about big things they wanted to do, but they never took that extra step, and I didn't want to just talk about it. I wanted to do it for her. And so there's that. There's those two things, and money, needing to make money, and sleep. And so I chose to kind of get rid of sleep, you know, which I would not recommend to anybody here. But I think Mike kind of did the same thing.
I
for that
do
period
the
of our
same
time.
thing.
Yeah, you need to learn that lesson. No, I struggle sleeping too. But so that was in the beginning, and that was kind of the, you know, again, the basketball thing. a lot of those players who work really hard in the beginning, their bodies start breaking down and they don't have long careers, they have short careers, you know. So I think that helped us for our short sprint. But for our long-term game, we realized that's just not sustainable and not realistic. And so now we are kind of in that process of being like, I prioritize my daughter kind of above all of my job stuff right now, especially she's getting 10. I'm like, there's moments where I'm like, Ellie, do you want to play? And she's like, I'm talking to my friend.
He's going to cry.
We're going to go play Roblox together. Can I come? And the door's just like, so I'm like, I want to be there always, you know, like soccer tomorrow, I'm there, you know. But I know there's going to be a moment where, like I said, the teenage years, maybe then I might want to sneak away and be like doing art stuff because I'm going to be stressed out of my mind. So it kind of balances out that way, you know, but it's hard. Life balance is really, really, really hard.
It is.
It's really not a good answer for it. You know, it's just day by day.
Yeah.
And that's Mike. Maybe Mike has the answer.
I don't have the answer, but I have an answer. One of the things that I've done and I continue to do is I always kind of plan ahead, and it's kind of actually my problem in life, is that I'm usually thinking too far ahead instead of thinking presently, right? So that's a problem in itself. But with that being said, I'm usually plotting a few steps ahead to get to a certain point. So like, for example, I said, oh, you know, eventually I want to work on so many projects that I'm able to choose. Okay, well, I'm going to burn myself out taking those projects to get to that point faster, right? Then I said, okay, you know what? I want to do something that's self-sustainable because eventually I know just being an athlete at one point that I can only do this for so long no matter how invincible I think I am. And then it was like, okay, well, maybe working on just one project or two projects or acquiring a skill set that will cut short the time that I need to apply to these things. So like at one point, I would literally be working from 6 a.m. to 12 a.m. daily, 7 days a week. My friend knows this is true. And it was driving me crazy, right? But eventually, what I do luckily is I do take breaks, months off, where I'll essentially, and I do this now, I'll work for about, a few months, but then I'll take 3-month breaks. So I'll work hard for like, say, 4 months, 5 months at a time. Then I'm taking 3 months off. And then I'm plotting what I need to do to adjust because I'm recognizing certain things that made my life kind of difficult, right? And so I think one of the big things is, though I suck at getting sleep, I am very good at taking a long break and like reassessing my life, right? Because there's some people who they'll continue on that road, and by the time they check their watch, they're like 20 years, deep into whatever career. I make sure that there needs to be a moment of stillness where once that stillness overcomes, I'm like, oh, you know what? I could have did this better. This would have made my time more precious, right? And also being aware that just because I've acquired a new skill set that will enable me to get the job done faster doesn't mean I have to now fill up that same space with that same amount of time, which is something that I desire to do. But taking those breaks, I think, is important, and taking long breaks. And once I did that on accident, but I was told by a producer, actually, totally not in my field, where she said, she was told that the amount of time you're working, you need to take that double in a break, but through weeks. So if you're working, say 2 years straight hardcore, you need to at least minimum take 8 weeks off. And even they said your mind doesn't really kick into vacation mode until after 3 weeks. So you're kind of knowing the difference between surviving or kind of eating to survive as opposed to eating for sustenance. It's the same thing with the break, right? How dare this? And so I would do that a lot, where I would just make sure that no matter what, I take my 3 months off minimum. Sometimes it'll be 4 to 5 months off in a year, but I'll be working hard in between that. So now the road that I'm on is to do something that works for me. So then when I want to say, you know what, I'm done with this, I can actually be done and not feel the need to do more. I can probably more so work on myself rather than working on stuff for other people. So it's kind of like always looking ahead, but you need those moments of stillness. It can't be this constant hustle, because when you're hustling and bustling, you're not really thinking, you're just surviving, you're just doing, right? So it has to be that moment, and that's what I give myself personally. I'm trying to get better at it, but yeah.
Mike's much better at that than I am, so
I
would
am.
take his advice over mine.
Yes.
And then, so I know we're past the time. If people have to go, again, I'm totally fine with that. I'm totally fine to hang out too, or if they're closing down this room, we can hang out somewhere else. That's fine with me too. I'm available to talk to whoever has questions or anything like that. The only last thing I'll say as you guys are walking out, which I always promised myself I would say this, is don't think you have to go to Art Center or Cal Arts or pay a bunch of money in tuition to go to school to do this. In fact, don't do that.
Don't do that.
Sorry, Art Center, don't do that.
I'm not
because
sorry.
I'm enslaved to, like, everybody went to Art Center unless you had a lot of money. It was like you're enslaved to an enormous amount of like doctor level debt, and it makes it really hard to move forward in life. And so, especially today, there's so many more resources than when we went to school, online to learn from people, books, whatever. My advice to anybody here is to try to do your best to save your money and to learn doing mutual coaching, online schools, books, workshops, going to things like this. You'll learn. Nobody's ever asked me ever if I had a college degree.
Never.
Ever.
Never.
Does not matter.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that's very
Wait,
clear.
but I also have to add this in, because my parents are foreigners, and I understand there's that other side where they're like,
Yeah.
you must be a doctor, lawyer, something, and you must have a degree. They don't know what the hell they're talking about, okay? So you don't need to do that the way. I know the pressure. And that's a real thing, and hopefully educating the parents and helping them understand that, fix things. But I also know that foreign parents are very stubborn, and it's different. It's different. Anyways, so making sure that you help them understand whether that's the truth or not, it doesn't matter. You're going to be paying that debt, not them, right? They'll tell you, be a lawyer, be a doctor, be an artist, whatever. They're not going to tell you to be an artist, but they're gonna tell you to acquire that $250,000 worth of debt that you're paying over a lifetime. You could buy a house. Not in California, but you can buy a house. Hold on.
Or community college. I mean,
Yeah.
I learned a ton in community college. There's sometimes I even think about going back for certain things just to learn. It's affordable. I just really push for this part. Like Mike and I had opposite experiences. My experience was like my dad basically said, "You're not a college person. Take up a trade. Go be a carpenter or an electrician."
Damn.
And so
That's raw as fuck.
yeah. So art school I thought was the only way to do it. And I look back and I have to say, I don't know if I would be here if I hadn't taken those steps, but I definitely think that with what you guys have available to you today, it's like take advantage of it. And to answer your question, you do not need a degree. It does not matter if this is what you want to do for your career. You don't need a degree.
But, devil's advocate, knowing yourself is important, right? And speaking to that, I know myself, and because of that, I know how to redline myself as well. And I think it's a good idea that I know, in a sense of myself, I generally need someone to like help push me sometime. And school was a good thing for me to do, because I was like, yeah, I'm probably not gonna look at YouTube, right? I know myself, which is important. I know that I wasn't gonna just follow a YouTube video. I know that I really am bad at looking at tutorials online and just like trying to follow them. And I also know that I needed time to myself where other people see me and they're like, oh, you're doing homework, right? Because if you're just doing it for yourself, for some reason, people who are not artists just think that we're just like having fun. They don't see the pain and suffering that's going behind any of your drawings or paintings. And so I knew my situation, and so thus school was important for me. But if that's you, then yeah, do school, right? It's also not saying like don't do school. It's just don't feel the need to do school if that doesn't, if it's not the best viable option. But get as little debt as possible. Trust.
My follow-up question to that. Do you think that you need to have the same, if you're not going to take the school route, do you need to have the pressure?
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah,
Then you
probably more.
Then you definitely need the mutual coach big time.
Yeah.
Because I think we outgrew Art Center after a while to where we were like, why are we even going to the school?
Yeah.
Because we were pushing each other harder than we were being pushed at school.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure. When it comes to that, you have to put more pressure on yourself than a school ever would, because there's certain things in school like getting connections and things of that nature. So it's kind of like working in the industry as well. It's like if your goal is to be, I don't know, some amazing artist who you admire in the industry, well, understanding that they do that 8 hours a day, 5 days a week at least, right? That means to get there, to get to that spot, you almost have to do double for a certain amount of time to catch up and then eventually surpass, hopefully, right? So it's the same thing with school to non-school. It's, yeah, in school, they have curated time where they get to just focus only on that. And as someone who is staying at home, doing whatever, you have to make sure that you're doing that much, if not more. And mutual coaching does help with that. And building a community around yourself also really helps with that in general. And you might find that there's more people more like you in the sense of like not going to school and being willing to like collaborate than there are people going to school and collaborate, because sometimes schools can kind of promote a toxic nature and competitive nature, but not in a good way. Whereas generally, if you are doing stuff that's outside of that, people are more willing to collaborate because no one wants to be by themselves, essentially.
Question. There was, you guys talked about like making true to yourself and like focusing on what you like to do and knowing what you like to do when no one else is telling you what to do. How do you try to, I guess, like decipher that from becoming complacent? Because I feel like a big problem for me is it's always hard to figure out like, do I actually like doing this stuff, or is it because I've already reached a certain level to where it's easy for me, so I just always go back to it?
That's a really
It's
good
hard to try to figure out which is which. Like if I'm growing and being myself,
Mhm.
or just being complacent.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think
lack
it's-
of growth is like
Yeah.
one of the, like the growth, I think, is like one of those things where when you see someone doing the same thing over and over again and they're not growing, that's probably them being complacent. Whereas like when they're able to like deep dive into their own work and be like, oh, this still isn't right, you can tell that they're like still actively growing and learning, but they're enjoying it. It's just one of those things where when you're doing something you really enjoy, you're always going to try and get to that next level. Whereas if you're just complacent, you're going to be comfortable drawing the same figure in the same pose, blah, 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 you know? That's how I see it.
Yeah, there's like somebody said it once where they said, make sure you brand yourself before somebody else brands you for you. I think we're very sensitive to that, where originally I was like the Ivan Earl guy. I was really into Ivan Earl, and I did very graphic work, which is nothing like what I do now. But as soon as I felt like that was happening, it was like, okay, I want to switch. And I got into something else, and I want to switch. And even the work I'm doing now, it's not on my website 'cause it's not released, looks nothing like the work that's on my website. And I think we've both been very sensitive to that it's less about our style. It's more about our voice and trying to switch it up intentionally. So we're almost like developed an allergy to like being in one place for too long, where it's like,
Yeah.
okay, it's really cool. You got that Leica style down. Switch. No more Leica, do something else.
Yeah.
So
I've had that reaction before, actually, where, and we've actually talked about this, where like as soon as someone says, I like what you did there, I stop doing it. But that's just also part of my personality. It's like, don't give me positive reinforcement. Even when me and Christina climb, it's like, if she tells me like you suck, I'll probably finish that climb. But if she's like you're doing great, I like fail every time. I don't know why. It's just a Simba, But yeah, just understanding like where you recognizing like the want and the need for growth, I think is generally the answer.
And even just that thought occurring to you is probably a sign to like switch it up.
Mm-hmm.
Even just that you're thinking, am I doing this for this reason or this reason? It's like, that's enough to know
Yeah.
I should switch it up and do something
Yeah.
out of my comfort zone. Being uncomfortable is a really big part of it.
Yeah.
No problem.
And thriving in the uncomfortabilities. All right. I think we did it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.